Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. So this week on Tuesday, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson announced that she will be sending 7.7 million ballot applications to every registered voter in the state of Michigan. And I was sort of curious about how exactly the state of Michigan was paying for this. And so I did some inquiries, and it turned out the legislature didn't authorize this, but she was going to be using CARES Act funds in order to do this. And according to the Secretary of State's office, they told me that they were spending $4.5 million in CARES Act funds in order to promote this. And what I found was that the stimulus bill, which is 800 pages long, on pages 668 and 669, $400 million was provided to the Election Assistance Commission for, quote, election security grants to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus domestically or internationally for the 2020 federal election cycle. So nowhere in the bill did it mention vote by mail. So those funds then went to the Election Assistance Commission, and that organization, in an April letter to every state in America, said that the purpose and use of the funds would include printing of additional ballots and envelopes for potential higher levels of absentee or vote-by-mail processes. So the state of Michigan is using that as the green light to advance vote-by-mail. So on Wednesday, President Trump responded on Twitter, and he said this was done illegally and without authorization by a rogue Secretary of State. I will ask to hold up funding to Michigan if they want to go down this voter fraud path. Joining me now is Joel Pollak. He is senior editor-at-large at Breitbart.com, which is a fantastic website. And Joel is also author of the new book, Red November, which is due to be released July 14th and is available now for pre-order on Amazon. So Joel, what shade of red will America be in November? Republican red or socialist red? And then also, what effect could the Democrat push for vote by mail in Michigan and other states have on the outcome?
Hi, Kyle. Well, we don't know yet if it's going to be socialist red or Republican red, but if you read the book, you'll get a sense of why that's the choice, because this Democratic Party primary has been the most left-wing in the history of the country. Not since Eugene Debs ran as the Socialist Party candidate early in the 20th century have we seen anything like it. And the fact that Joe Biden is the nominee doesn't change that. He keeps moving to the left because he has to appease a grassroots base in the Democratic Party that has shifted significantly to the left over the last few years with the emergence of the resistance, quote unquote, to the Trump administration. So it's a really fascinating question you ask, and it was a lot of fun to write this book because the primary was zany, it was adventurous. You have extraordinary things happening in the middle of all this campaigning. You have the impeachment, you have the coronavirus. So it all makes for, I think, what will be a very interesting and entertaining read. And even if you're not that interested in politics, I think you'll have a lot of fun reading Red November. But let's get to the question about voting in Michigan. So as you pointed out, the CARES Act provided grants to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and the states basically have a lot of discretion as to how they spend that funding. So I'm actually not sure if Trump has the leverage he claims to have to deny funding to Michigan. I think a lot of the funding is probably already out the door. Maybe he's talking about future funding. Maybe he would be talking about future grants to Michigan under the EAC. I don't know. What I do know is that he's probably correct about the law in terms of whether Michigan can do this or not. The law that's applicable here would be state law in Michigan and not necessarily federal law. Now, the New York Times did a fact check of Trump's claim yesterday or a few days ago, and they said that it is probably legal for Michigan to do this, and they cited Proposition 3. Proposition 3 was passed in the last election in 2018. It amended the state constitution to make a number of changes to voting, and one of the changes it made was allowing absentee voting for any cause whatsoever. You don't have to justify your request for an absentee ballot in Michigan by saying you're overseas, you're at college, you're sick, you're in the U.S. military. None of that. You just apply for an absentee ballot. You can even print the ballot form application, at least the application form for the ballot. You can print it out in your home computer. So that's the current state of the law in Michigan. However, That proposition did not say anything about authorizing the state to send out ballot applications itself. Now, private entities like political parties can and have been sending ballot applications out, but the state itself is not expressly authorized in Proposition 3. Why is that important? Because there's a court case from 2008, Fleming versus Macomb, where the Michigan Court of Appeals held unanimously that even though political parties can send out unsolicited absentee ballot applications to their members, even then, before Proposition 3, the state does not have that authorization. And they relied on the language of the statute. They actually looked at Michigan's election law, and they said there's nothing in this law that authorizes, in this case, it was a local clerk, a county clerk in Macomb County. Nothing authorizes the clerk simply to send out absentee ballot applications. In this case, I think it was to elderly people in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't change that with Proposition 3 in 2018. There was no language added to the statute that authorizes any official, state or local, to send unsolicited absentee ballot applications. It does say that the applications shall be made available and a person can apply to vote by mail, or they can apply to vote in person. And even if they applied to vote by mail, they can show up in person. So they try to make it as easy as possible for someone who wants to vote by mail to vote, even if they don't end up voting by mail. But there's nothing in there that actually authorizes the state to send out these unsolicited applications. The Trump campaign believes that makes the governor's order or the governor's policy unlawful, and it in fact may be unlawful. So I don't know what the next step is. Presumably there would be a course of action in the courts, either for the Michigan Republican Party or the Trump campaign, to sue the state and ask the courts either to block these applications or to have them reviewed independently. It's hard to know exactly what they'll do. Maybe the horse is already out of the stable, can't bolt the door. But
Right.
Trump is probably correct that what Michigan did lacked legal authorization. I'm not sure what the remedy would be. He says he'll withhold federal funding. He didn't specify these EAC funds. Maybe it'll be funding for the future. We know that he's clashed with Governor Whitmer. Governor Whitmer now has a bigger problem to deal with in the election. She's got this dam breach in the Midland area with the Edenville Dam and the Sanford Dam. And the state actually was supposed to take over responsibility for those dams after the federal government denied the license for the dam operator in 2018. So Whitmer's got a lot of other problems to worry about. But this issue of just sending ballots out to people, a lot of Republicans are worried that that could lead to fraud. And I think, to be honest, a lot of Democrats want there to be that potential, not because they want to create fraud, but because Democrats have the idea, I'm not sure it's true, but Democrats have the idea that if you make voting easier for people, more people will vote Democratic. I think there's evidence that sometimes that's not true, that sometimes you have low propensity voters who, when you bring them to the polls, vote for the Republican or vote for the conservative candidate. So you're kind of having this debate in a vacuum. There are some studies and there's some data to suggest one or another possibility, but Republicans want more ballot security. The Republicans believe that Democrats manipulate voting for their advantage, that they like to use batches of mail-in ballots. And there's some evidence, and anecdotally at least, of things like that happening. However, you also have anecdotes where Republicans have illegally, in some cases, used ballot harvesting, this practice of rounding up other ballots to swing elections. We know that voter fraud happens. The idea that it doesn't happen is a myth. It does happen. And in some races, close races, it can be decisive.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Joe Pollak is Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart.com. His new book, Red November, is due to be released July 14th, but it's available now for pre-order at Amazon.com. Joel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much.
We'll be right back. This is The Kyle Olson Show.